Today's video is going to describe putting a suspension fork onto a 29-inch bicycle. The original 29-inch bicycle had a rigid fork with an axle that is a standard quick release axle that the internals of the axle are built into the hub. The replacement suspension fork has what's called a through axle. So the axle itself is not built into the hub, it is a component of the fork. So there's a 20 millimeter, in this case 20 millimeter through axle that actually goes through a hub that has a hollow internal tube in it. This suspension fork has a 20 millimeter tube on it, and the more common standard is now a 15 millimeter tube. So it's very difficult to find a 29-inch wheel with a 20 millimeter through axle. So the focus of this video is going to be actually creating a wheel that has a 20 millimeter through axle for a 29-inch wheel. So I will be building a wheel that is just like you normally see a normal bicycle wheel, except that we're actually going to order the components of that wheel and build it. The components of a bicycle wheel are, one, the rim, which is on the outside, and that will either be a 26-inch or a 29-inch typically. There are some other sizes, 27.5 for instance. As well as you need to have spokes, nipples that hold those spokes in place. You need to have a hub, which has the appropriate axle in the middle. And you have to have rim tape, which protects the tube if you have a tire with a tube from the ends of the spokes. One of the first things that you have to determine when you have decided on what rim you want to use, as well as what hub you want to use, is you have to perform the measurements that are necessary in order to purchase the correct length of spoke. In this case, the length of spoke is 292 millimeters, and I'm going to give you a very quick description of what you have to do in order to do that. As you see on the screen now, there is a web page that I use to build wheels. I will give you the URL that actually takes you to this website. On this website, you can select the wheel type or manufacturer model, but a far more reliable way to determine the parameters that are necessary for building the wheel is for the rim to look for the ERD measurement that's supplied by the manufacturer, the effective rim diameter, and put that in from the manufacturer. And then the hub itself, if you have a hub that's say 110 millimeter width, some hubs can be 135 millimeter width, but in this case 110 millimeter width, you can then measure the distance between the end of the axle to the flange and from each side of the hub, and subtract those from 55, which is half of the 110, and put in the flange to center for the two sides. Now, if you see on this one, with the parameters put in there, as well as the overall width of the rims of the hub, that is 58, you see that the calculated, in addition to the parameters that you put in for the width of the hub, you also have to put in the number of spokes and the lacing pattern that is required for your wheel. In this case, this is the number of spokes is 32, and the typical lacing pattern, and it's generally very good default, is a 3-cross lacing pattern. And after you do that, you'll see that you can calculate what the spoke length is. In my case, it's 291.2 and 292.1, and within a millimeter you can select your spoke length. As you can see here, I have spokes that are 292 long. The spokes, when you order spokes, if you have, say, black spokes to get the nipples that are also black, but you can also get the stainless spokes and they look fine as well. The other selection you have to make when you're ordering spokes is whether to get straight spokes, what are called single butted spokes, or double butted spokes. The difference between the spokes is that the straight, the spoke itself is the same length, the entire length of the spoke. Single butted means that it is only tapered on one end, and double butted means that it's tapered on both ends. So you have extra strength where it joins the hub or joins the rim and is thinner for lower weight in the remainder of the hub. So in general, I would select double butted spokes if you're just selecting the spokes. The next thing you need to know is which tools are being used for building the wheel. One item that you're going to need is you're going to need a spoke wrench of some kind. In this case, I'm showing two different Park Tool spoke wrenches. One is for a specific size of nipple, which is a 3.23 millimeter spoke wrench. There's also a more generic one which will fit any of the three most common spoke sizes. And I'm picking the one on the left because I don't want to risk marring the black paint on the spokes with the spoke wrench. The other thing that you'll commonly need is you'll need a flathead screwdriver, which is used for tightening the nipples when you're doing the initial tightening of the spokes. And potentially you're going to need some Allen keys and maybe a Phillips head screwdriver, number 2 screwdriver. Now, if you are in a pinch, you might actually use these many common multi-tools for bikes have spoke wrenches, flatheads, Allen keys, and Phillips head built into them, but it's usually a little more awkward to use a multi-tool when doing the activities. The other thing that you're going to need is you're going to need some type of measurement which has metric millimeters on it, because you're going to need that in order to be able to measure the parameters for the hub. When building the wheel, if you already have an existing wheel that you can use as a reference, it's very handy. And generally you'll have potentially if you're building a front wheel, you'll have the back rear wheel. In other cases, you'll have another bicycle that you can use as a reference. In this case, the stem for the air on the rim is at the top, and the traditional way when building a wheel is to put the label so it is facing in the same direction as the stem for the rim. And you can put your new rim in place, and you're going to put in the first spoke from the left of that stem. You put in that spoke, and then you're going to put in each spoke, successive spoke, going around from that same hole on the rim. You're going to put in every other hole in the hub, and you can put it in every fourth hole in the rim. As I said before, it's traditional to put the label facing the valve facing each other. And in this case, if my mount for my disc brake is the same direction that it was on the other wheel, then I will be facing that direction when actually building this wheel. Okay, the next step after you've dropped a spoke in every other hole on that same side of the hub is from the number 1 spoke that is to the left of that valve stem, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You find the 5th spoke down. This is for the 32 hole hub. You find the 5th spoke down and you lace that. It goes under, and then over that, and then you skip 1 hole and it goes into the hole that's in between. and you put a nipple on that. The same thing will be repeated for each of the remaining spokes in there, and that will complete one side of the wheel being laced. So you've now put in that one spoke, and you find the next spoke, and again you go in to the hole that is second to the left of the next location on the hub, on the wheel, on the rim. At the end of putting in the clockwise spokes on one side and then the counterclockwise spokes on the other side, it should begin to look very familiar as the pattern. One thing to verify when you've put those two sets of spokes in for the one side of the hub is to make sure that the cross pattern is correct on each of the spokes, that you are crossing over on the top of the spoke going the counterclockwise direction aimed spoke. For the third set, you now will be turning the wheel over and putting the spokes in. If you go from the spoke hole, you'll be putting in the third hole from the top. You'll be putting in the third spoke hole down. After turning the rim over, you will be counting the fourth hole from the one that is straight underneath the hole and putting the spoke in. Now this one is a little more difficult because in order to get it in, you actually have to get past the spokes that you've already put in. So you have to bend them slightly when you're putting it in, and you will get used to it after the first spoke or so. But you're putting in that one spoke, and that one will be going in to the hole that is just to the left of the valve stem at this point. The next step is to repeat the same process with all of the other 7 spokes for this set of 8. For the final group of 8, you have to take the spokes from the underside of the wheel and put them through the hub from below. And the easiest way to do that is to put it through the small triangle that you see on the opposite side. And that comes up and goes through there, and it goes over, under, and then it goes into the remaining hole that is on the wheel rim. And you do the same thing for the additional 7 spokes. You go through from the bottom, over, under on the spokes for each of those remaining spokes. After having completed the 4th set and verifying that the direction as far as being under on each of those spokes is crossing correctly for the lacing, you're basically done with the lacing of the wheel. At this point, the next step is to at least tentatively tension the wheel to a similar spot for each of the spokes. So far, I've just been tightening the spokes enough where the threads have disappeared into the nipples, but now I'm going to tighten each of the spokes with the screwdriver until I can see the tip of the spoke in the nipple at the edge of the rim. And I'm going to do that through the entire wheel. I'm going to go and tighten up each of the spokes until I can see the tip of the spoke in the edge of the rim where the nipple is. At this point, after having made sure that where the top of the spoke lines up with the base of the nipple below the thread, the place where you would put a screwdriver in. If you make them all essentially the same depth, then you will wind up with a relatively firm wheel that you finished actually lacing a wheel of a bicycle. And as you can see, if I take this screw axle out now, I can actually put the wheel into the fork, and you have a bicycle wheel that you've actually laced. As you can see, there's a wobble in the wheel, but that means that the wheel needs to be trued, and that in itself is a bit of an art, and you need, in general, a truing jig that you can put it into, as well as the experience of doing that. And in many cases, that's a lot easier to just allow someone that's in a bike shop to actually do the truing of the wheel. But the lacing of the wheel and the purchasing of the spokes and the parts for it is something that is not that difficult, and you're a person that is a bit of an enthusiast can actually do that without a lot of difficulty. Now, I've taken the wheel over to a local bike shop, the REI around the corner, and they trued the wheel up and they gave it back to me, and I've put the tire on it, and perfectly good 29-inch bike wheel on the suspension fork. Now I can proceed with actually mounting the fork on the actual bicycle frame.